Who is Mr. Chien, the mysterious friend of Dieu Han's biological father, who came to her aid? Hello everyone. Today, let's uncover a mystery that has been buried for many years. A mystery surrounding a man deeply connected to the journey of Dieu Han, a determined single mother in her search for her biological family. That man is Mr. Chien, the close friend of her biological father. But who is he really? The story begins on a windless afternoon. Han was walking along a quiet village road, carrying her little son Tom in her arms. No one could have expected that a sudden incident was about to unfold. Right in front of Han was a scene that made her heart clench, a young woman being assaulted by two aggressive men, trying to snatch her purse in broad daylight. There was no one else around. Not a single cry for help rang out because people were too afraid. Even while carrying her child, Han remained calm. She made a split-second decision, clutching Tom tightly. She ran straight toward a nearby house where she had just caught a glimpse of a middle-aged man tending the garden. "Help!" Han screamed in panic. The man turned around, instantly grasped the situation, and rushed out to intervene. Caught off guard, the two thugs fled before they could do more harm. The young woman who was rescued couldn't stop thanking Han and the man. Her name was Dieuhan. From that moment on, the lives of these three people became unexpectedly intertwined. But they knew it wasn't over yet. The two attackers could return at any time, and next time, it might not just be a robbery. Dieuhan glanced at Han, the woman holding her child, panting, face pale with worry. Then, almost instinctively, Dieuhan offered, "Why don't you stay at my place for a few days? It's pretty safe there, they won't easily find you." Han hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded, not just out of fear of being tracked down, but also because she and little Tom had nowhere else to go. Han slowly followed behind Dieuhan, carrying little Tom in her arms. At last, they passed under a bridge. Ahead was a narrow alley that led to Dieuhan's home. Han let out a quiet sigh of relief. Tom was still peacefully asleep in her embrace. Dieuhan turned back and gave a soft smile. "We're here. Come inside and rest for a bit." Dieuhan's small house was tucked away at the end of the alley. Dieu Han sat down on an old bamboo chair, still damp with traces of afternoon rain, while holding Tom close. Dieuhan stepped out from her modest kitchen, holding 2 glasses of water. She placed one in front of Han, then quietly sat down beside her. "Here, drink this. You'll feel better." Han took a small sip, then set the glass down, her eyes filled with gratitude as she looked at Dieuhan. She began to tell Dieuhan everything about meeting Jiang and her journey to the city in search of her biological parents. Dieuhan listened with empathy, then opened up in return. "My stepfather. He's hard to describe. He treated me like a piece of property. When my younger brother lost a gambling bet, my stepfather forced me to marry a man 20 years older to pay off the debt. I was only 17. I refused. I ran away. But he wouldn't let me go. He hired people to find me, took photos, even threatened to send letters to my hometown to drag me back. Now I don't know where else to go, so I just try to live quietly in this area, hidden from him." The two women sat in the old house, bound by something greater, understanding. A strange friendship began to blossom, born from very real pain. Dieuhan gently stood up. "Why don't you stay here with me? I live alone and I rarely cook. But now that you're here, it might be nice. I'll fry some eggs and prep the veggies, you can cook the rice, okay?" Han smiled softly, her eyes glistening. Yes, it's been a long time since I felt like I had someone at home. After a short while of bustling about, their humble meal was ready. The pot of rice was perfectly cooked, warm and fragrant. Dieuhan had finished frying the golden eggs, and the plate of fresh green morning glory sat neatly on the side. The little kitchen came alive not with noisy chatter or laughter, but with the quiet, comforting feeling of two weary souls finally finding a moment of peace. The next morning, a ray of hope. The next morning, before the sunlight had even slipped through the cracks of the window, Han was already awake. Today, she was determined to uncover some clue about her biological parents, the people she had longed to meet for so many years. A little while later, Dieuhan woke up and walked into the kitchen with a sleepy smile. But then, looking a bit apologetic, she said, "Sister Han, I'm so sorry. I have to go meet with the garden owner today. I won't be able to go with you and little Tom." Han smiled gently and shook her head. "It's okay, I understand. You've got your own work to take care of. Don't worry about us." The two women shared a warm, heartfelt breakfast together. After they finished eating, Dieuhan hurried off to the garden, while Han stayed behind to tidy up the house, her way of showing gratitude for Dieuhan's kindness. Once everything was clean and in order, she lifted Tom into her arms and set off once again. She wandered down street after street, checking every address carefully. While lost in thought, she accidentally bumped into a middle-aged man. He stumbled slightly, then turned around and snapped harshly, his face twisted in annoyance. Before Han could say a word, a woman stepped out of the nearby house and scolded the man loudly. "Mr. Chien, she just made a little mistake. What are you getting so worked up about, yelling like that?" Then turning to Han, she softened her tone. "You and your son look exhausted. Come in and have a glass of water." Han bowed in thanks and stepped into the small home of Mr. and Mrs. Chien. When the three had settled down, Han reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo, a picture of her father in his youth, and handed it to Mrs. Chien. She stared at the photo for a long moment, then her expression suddenly shifted. "Wait here a bit. I'll call my husband. He knows more than I do." Moments later, Mr. Chien returned. Though he still looked irritated, his expression began to change as soon as he saw the photo. He studied it closely, then asked quietly, "Child, can you show me your hands?" Confused, Han complied. He looked at them for a long time, then suddenly gasped, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "It's true. You're Chien, Hung's daughter." Han's heart skipped a beat. That name is Chien, the name she had as a child. No one had called her that in years. With a trembling voice, she asked, "Then, where are my parents now?" Mr. Chien sat down, his voice solemn. He explained that when Han was young, her parents had to leave their hometown to seek work in the south. They had come back to look for her, but the situation was chaotic, and they had lost track of each other. Now her parents were still in the south, but soon they might be returning to visit the village. Mrs. Chien gently added, "Why don't you and your son stay here for a few days? Who knows, they might come back. It's better to be with family than waiting alone." Han was overwhelmed with emotion,
and bowed deeply in gratitude. However, she politely asked to return to Uyen's house, where she could better care for Tom and not trouble them too long. Before leaving, she clasped Mr. Chien's hand tightly, her eyes shining with a glimmer of hope, the first in so many years lost in darkness.
But Han still didn't know the true identity of Mr. Chien. In reality, Mr. Chien was Uyen's stepfather, the very man who had once helped Han. He was a complicated person. At first, he treated Uyen kindly, but everything began to change the moment Uyen's younger brother got involved in gambling. The debt quickly spiraled out of control. The family fell into crisis. And instead of protecting his stepdaughter, Mr. Chien made a devastating decision. He chose to sell Uyen to a wealthy man in the village to pay off the debt. At that time, Uyen was only 16, full of dreams and ambitions, but everything crumbled in a single night. She discovered the truth by accident, overhearing a conversation between Mr. and Mrs. Chien. Unable to bear it, she packed her belongings and ran away into the night. Her stepfather and younger brother searched everywhere for her, but she left no trace. Still, Mr. Chien didn't give up. He and Uyen's brother hired people to track her down, even paid local thugs to put pressure on her, trying to force her return. Since then, she had lived a life on the run, drifting from place to place, hiding in the shadows, never leaving a trail behind. Even though the journey was far from over, Han still didn't know that Mr. Chien was Uyen's stepfather. And Uyen had no idea that Han had already met him. Han still didn't know who her real parents were. Inside her heart, countless questions remained unanswered. But one thing Han knew for sure: she was no longer alone. She had Tom, the one and only reason she kept going. She had Uyen, an imperfect friend, but a genuine one. And no matter what the truth about Mr. Chien turned out to be, Han believed she was strong enough to face it. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew this time she wouldn't run anymore. Perhaps family isn't just the place we're born into. It's where, even in the middle of life's storms, someone still holds our hand and doesn't let go. The road ahead may still be long, but I believe Han will find her parents, and maybe even more than she hoped for.
Cho dù cuộc hành trình vẫn chưa kết thúc, Hân vẫn chưa biết ông chính là cha dượng của Uyên, và Uyên cũng chưa biết Hân đã gặp cha dượng mình. Dù Hân vẫn chưa biết cha ruột mình là ai, trong lòng cô vẫn chất chồng những câu hỏi chưa lời giải. Nhưng Hân biết cô không còn cô đơn nữa. Hân có Tôm, lý do duy nhất khiến Hân gắng gượng. Hân có Uyên, một người bạn không hoàn hảo nhưng thật lòng. Và dù sự thật về ông chính có là gì đi nữa, Hân cũng tin rằng mình đủ mạnh mẽ để đối diện. Cô không biết điều gì đang chờ ở phía trước, nhưng Hân biết cô sẽ không chạy trốn nữa. Có lẽ gia đình không chỉ là nơi ta sinh ra, mà là nơi giữa những giông gió vẫn có người nắm tay ta mà không buông. Dù hành trình còn dài, nhưng tôi tin Hân sẽ tìm được cha mẹ mình.